G'day, Scale Tankers. Just thought I'd throw this quick video together just to give you a hand on the pattern making casting process. Just a few tips just to help you on your way. I'm sure they'll save you a bit of trouble. We'll start with the pattern. Basically, there's no separating parts. It has a 6-degree taper so that when the sand is removed, or the pattern's removed from the sand, there's no edges that are going to bash anywhere or break off. As I say, this one's got 6 degrees. You can go less. You can go down to 2 degrees if you want to, but I'd only do that if it was machined, so you have a perfectly flat surface, because any undulations in the side, it tends to grip on those. I've gone with 6. There is I think a good reason, especially when it comes to height, because if we can just imagine for a moment that this blue bowl, this is the pattern. So the pattern goes on the table and we get a box, a cope or drag, whichever one. We put it around it and we ram this with sand. So if we can imagine for a minute that this is full of sand and the pattern's inside it. Okay. So if we imagine again that this is actually the sand around the mould or the pattern. When we go to remove this, we've actually got to remove the pattern, which is in blue, from the sand. And when we lift it, it has to come up vertical. Very important that it comes straight up, because the steeper this angle, the more precise you have to be lifting this off. Okay, at 6 degrees it's not too bad, because the higher you get, the more movement it allows you to have. With this pattern inside it, weighs about 15 kilos. And when you're trying to lift 15 kilos straight up without movement, like you can't lift it this way, this way, this way, this has to stay perfectly flat and lift it up vertical, as still and precise as you can, because any movement in this will cause the sand to bash on the pattern as you're removing it. Okay. When you're making your pattern, have to make sure that everything will separate perfectly, so that there's no undercuts. If you've got any undercuts, it's just not going to remove, it's going to take away the sand as you remove it. Bit of a mess. Also, you've got to think about how you're going to hold it in the mill or the lathe, and how you're actually going to pour the aluminium in, because ideally, well, you have to. The aluminium has to come in at the bottom and it has to rise up. If it goes in the top and then spills over this part, it'll go cold, and by the time the aluminium gets to the top, this will be cold and you'll get all these weird shrink lines. Not very good. So the way this was actually cast is, that went in there like that, and this is a feeder. Feeder is very important, especially when you're dealing with thick castings, because we've got a casting, or this casting area here, from this point to this point, it's probably about 40 millimeters. So you're 40 millimeters thick, and I say that's about 60 millimeters wide. So 60 by 40, it's a fair bit of aluminium, and when it shrinks, you need to be replacing that shrinkage with molten aluminium. And as you can see, let me show you that. This was actually a feeder which goes on top here. Okay, that's where that belongs. So we pour it in here, the aluminium rises, and it rises and goes into here, into the feeder. As it's cooling down, it's actually shrinking, but it's sucking the molten aluminium down, and you can see like it's quite deep. It's that deep into there, how much it's actually shrunk down. So you have to think about how you're going to hold it, and also how you're going to pour it. This was pretty easy. Basically, 3-jaw chuck around there allowed me to machine a flat just here. Okay, that's the flat. Then I could turn it round, and I could hold this in the 3-jaw chuck and machine this side. Very easy. This had the hub built into it. So we've got a bearing goes in the back, and we've got a bearing that goes underneath this little plate. The next one, I'm actually using a trailer hub. It's a Ford 150mm 5-stud. The reason I'm using that is basically strength. I think the front idler, and that's what I'm actually making next, the front idler, that's actually, it's going to be under a fair bit of stress, especially under braking and stuff like that, so I figured that something a bit more heavy duty would be a little bit better. Okay, is that removed from there, and this little bearing goes in there like so. So, this is the hub that I'll actually be using for the front idler wheel. So I'm going to make one side of the wheel go on this side, then I'm going to machine this side so it's nice and flat like this side, and then the other side will bolt on this side, and this will sit right in the middle. Okay, we can actually flash forward to that. This is it here, not finished, sort of almost done. Basically that'll go in there, and you'll get another one on that side. So this one being a little bit different, without having the hub, I'll probably have to put the feeder, because this is 20 mils thick. I've made this, so I have 20 mils of aluminium thickness everywhere. So everything's dead on 20 mil, so it's gonna do a fair bit of shrinking, and it's gonna have to have a large feeder. This is not going to be big enough. I'd say I think this is going to weigh something in the region of 6.5 kilograms. The feeder, I'd probably put about a 4 kilogram feeder on it. The reason you use so much aluminium is because of also gravity. Gravity is actually pushing down, as well as it's shrinking. It's shrinking as it cools, and it's actually drawing the molten aluminium down. The more pressure you've got on the top is actually pushing it down as well. I'll probably put them to the side. Probably just need one. I'll probably put a feeder in this side, like that. No, a feeder on this side and an in gate on this side. So I'll be pouring in here. This will actually rise up and then go up, and then it'll go into the feeder, and then pretty much done. I'll go into this a little bit more in a moment.